It's Wednesday, and you all know what that means. It's time for another episode of the Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co hosts. My name is Ryan Kim. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. This week, well, I was thinking it was a quiet week, but no, there's actually quite a lot going on. Daredevil is being rebooted, allegedly. The Mission Impossible trailer dropped just today as we're recording this. And on top of all of that, we're going to be talking about more movies that never got made. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But first, I got to introduce my co host, the main man, Jacob Martin. Jacob, how's it going, sir?
I'm actually doing pretty good considering it's raining over here in Virginia now, and sinuses are messing me up, and I get my frequent on and off headaches whenever the weather changes. I'm really excited about this week. Besides all the stuff you brought up, Top Gun Mavericks coming out this weekend. I'm super excited to see that. Obi-Wan Kenobi is dropping on Disney Plus. Season 4 of Stranger Things is dropping at the same time on Netflix. I'm super hyped for that. Maybe not the extended run times of every episode, but I'm still excited to see the show nonetheless, to see how big and massive the show's going to be. And I'm excited to talk about what we're going to talk about this week, the Mission Impossible trailer. We're recording this on a Monday, so supposedly the Thor: Love and Thunder trailer is supposed to be dropping sometime tonight as we're recording this. It's a shame we're not talking about it on this podcast, but that's something we might save for next week. But there's some exciting stuff up ahead. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it always happens when we record on a Monday night. It's like literally the next day, something big happens, and we're like, only we had waited.
Yes.
but it's going to be a really fun show, and let's dive into some stuff we've been watching lately, though we're going to keep this brief because we do have a lot to unpack tonight. So Jacob, what have you been watching lately? I see on your Hitchcock project you finally made it to The Man Who Knew Too Much. You are literally pulling an Andy Dufresne. You're like, I made it, yes.
Yes, I made it. The Man Who Knew Too Much. This is the original, as Hitchcock actually made the film twice. I'll be covering the 1950s version much later on. That one, of course, starring Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day. This one came out in 1934. I haven't seen, this is the first time I've seen this version, and I haven't seen the other one. So I'm assuming the premise in both is really similar. It's this married couple who get caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they witness an assassination. And because they know too much, the daughter has been kidnapped. And so it's up to this couple to, find her before it's too late. It's a pretty simple premise. And I thought it was a pretty solid movie. You can definitely see a lot of the great tropes that make Hitchcock movies awesome in this movie. Obviously, a load of suspense. There's a conspiracy going on in the background. There's like some intense shootouts, and there's twists and turns along the way. And there was a lot of stuff I enjoyed in this movie. Like there's a hypnotism scene that made my skin crawl when I watched the film. There's actually a load of fun throughout the movie. Like there's a fight scene where people are beating each other up with chairs. I wasn't expecting to see that in a Hitchcock movie, but that happened and it was fun. This movie is also noteworthy for being the first English language performance from actor Peter Lorre, who you may recognize in movies like Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Kirk Douglas. Criminally underrated Disney movie there. But yeah, he's really good in this movie. He's one of the bad guys in this one. I can't say this is my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie. I do think the third act is a little bit standard and routine, but I did like the build up, and it's still an enjoyable early entry in Alfred Hitchcock's filmography. And considering most of the movies I've watched prior to this have not really been that good, some of which don't even feel like Hitchcock movies at all, this is like the turning point, step in the right direction movie. And I'm excited to dive into the remainder of his filmography, whether the ones I've never seen and the many that I'll be rewatching.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your review that Peter Lorre starred in the German film M, which I covered for
Yes.
Scary Mania last year. He is awesome in that movie. That movie is definitely definitely one of the great scary movies that no one really talks about anymore. If you watch like crime thriller, like any crime thriller, I think you can trace its origins back to M if you really think about
Yeah, that's not a movie that I was particularly blown away by any means, but Peter Lorre's performance was fantastic, especially the monologue that he gives at the very end of the movie. Like that was a very chilling performance that was definitely made the movie stand out for sure.
it. Yeah, absolutely. So what else you got?
Uh, yeah, keeping it short, I'll share three more. I did check out for Billy Wilder, The Fortune Cookie. This is a Billy Wilder directed comedy, which, fun fact, marked the first time Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau starred in a movie together. They had this lifelong friendship and that spanned decades, and they starred in a bunch of other movies together, some of which were directed by Billy Wilder. They also starred in other movies outside Billy Wilder, like Grumpy Old Men and The Odd Couple, just to name a few. The Fortune Cookie, in that movie, Jack Lemmon's a cameraman who is filming his football game. An accident happens and he gets knocked over accidentally by the key quarterback. He falls over and is seriously injured. Walter Matthau plays his brother-in-law, who's a hotshot lawyer, and he decides, I'm going to make as much money off of this as much as possible and scheme a ridiculous lawsuit, making it far worse than it actually is, so that we can make money and be rich off of this thing. And so they conspire to do just that. And there's other stuff that shows up, like the ex-wife of Jack Lemmon comes back because she feels sympathy for him, even though there's a little bit of shady dealings going on there. It turns out she actually came back just because she heard about this lawsuit and she wants to earn a share of the earnings as well. There's also this subplot with the football player who hurt Jack Lemmon, and he feels kind of guilty about the whole thing, and he's having some self-confidence after that. There's definitely a lot of layers in this film. What's fascinating to me is that Walter Matthau actually won an Oscar for this movie. He won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. That shocked me when I looked that up, because normally when you're in a comedic movie, the Oscars tend to not give Oscars to comedic performances. But when you watch the film, he is actually really awesome in this movie. And seeing him and Jack Lemmon go about at it was some of the strengths of the movie. Now, I don't think this is a particularly amazing movie. I actually have a lot of issues with it. I love the premise, but I'm not a fan of the execution. Like, the movie was littered with maybe one too many subplots. I think it could have trimmed the ex-wife subplot because it dragged the movie way too thin. I think if it focused on the main characters and the football player, I think it would have been a much more streamlined, more focused movie. I think the ending is a little weak as well. It's a movie that I didn't love personally, but if you love these actors and you want to see them in a Billy Wilder film, then this is definitely a movie to check out.
Yeah, I heard of this one. I love Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. They were just awesome together in pretty much anything that they were in together. It's funny you mentioned Grumpy Old Men. That's one of my favorite comedies. I could quote that movie line for line for line.
I've actually never seen it.
It's so good. I learned half of my insults from that movie.
Oh,
It's literally the dialogue, and is like, just I'll say the words, "Morning, dickhead. Hello, moron." Like, that's literally their first interaction together.
wow.
And it's just like that throughout the entire thing. But it's so funny. They're like the definition of frenemies in that movie. They kind of hate each other, but they wouldn't be who they are without each other. So it's a paradox.
Yeah, I'll definitely need to check that one out. This is actually the first movie where I've seen the two together. I had heard about their legendary, comedic duo movies, but this was the first time I actually seen one with the fortune cookie. So yeah, I got a lot of movies to check out going forward.
Yeah, Jack Lemmon and Billy Wilder made a lot of money together. That is for certain.
Oh yeah. All right, and then the last two I'm going to share. I finally went and saw Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in theaters. I know it was a month late. I was busy in the last month. I finally got to see Sonic 2. Considering I wasn't the biggest fan of the first Sonic, where I felt like the first Sonic didn't feel like a Sonic movie to me until the third act of the movie. I will say this one is better. I still have quite a few issues with the film, but I think the essence of Sonic is there. I like that you got Tails and Knuckles throughout the course of this movie. In fact, Knuckles, I dare say, stole the entire movie. I love Idris Elba's performance, and some of the best laughs in the movie came from Knuckles as a character. I think the action sequences definitely stood out more in this sequel. The visual effects are pretty good. And I liked, seeing some of these characters interact and just, chill and have a good time. And, seeing the story develop. And I'm actually excited to see more Sonic movies after seeing this film. But there's two things that held this movie back for me. One, I'm really tired of seeing Sonic on Earth. I'd rather the movies focus like on his world to keep the movies, I think, more visually interesting. I don't know why they're so dead set of keeping these characters stuck on Earth interacting with the main human characters, because that leads me to my second point. The human elements, aside from Jim Carrey, who is awesome as Dr. Robotnik, I love his over the top performance. Everything else, human wise, was just dreadful. Like, there's a subplot in this movie involving James Marsden's wife's sister's wedding. And that subplot extended itself so bad. It literally hijacked, I'd say, the middle act of the movie. Like, it interrupts a key action scene. And then it veers into that subplot for like 10, 15 minutes. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing, movie? Where's Sonic at? I don't know what you're doing, but it was so forced. The humor was terrible there. I didn't like that side detour. It was so bad. The rest of the movie's not bad. I don't love it compared to others who rank it as like the best video game movie ever. I dare say I think I prefer Uncharted over this, but the movie's fine. I enjoyed it a lot more than the first one, and if they make more Sonic movies, I'll definitely see them, because this one is definitely the better Sonic movie, that's for sure.
Considering the design controversy that happened with the first one, considering that we've gotten not one but two Sonic movies that are at least good, I consider that a miracle, especially considering the track record of video game movies, which are just, that genre is just snake bit. It just really is. It can't catch a break. It has gotten better. The two Sonic movies, like I mentioned, Uncharted, which everybody seems to hate except for me and apparently you, because I actually had a lot of fun with that. As a fan of the games, I actually thought that was actually kind of good, but that's just me. But yeah, the whole wedding thing, I don't know, I think you might have mentioned that. The wedding, I
Yeah,
hated that.
the
That was
wedding,
just,
it was so stupid.
I was just sitting there like, can we please just end this now? What are we doing? And just the whole, it's so bad I don't even want to talk about it anymore.
It
The
didn't
rest of the
even
movie,
need to be there. That's the problem.
exactly. The rest of the movie is solid though, so skip that part and you're in for a good time. Well,
And the last thing I wanted to share was I saw the Chippendale Rescue Rangers movie on Disney Plus,
how'd it
and
go?
that turned out so good. That I actually did highly enjoy the film. I was actually one who saw the trailers, and I'm like, this movie actually looks really, really good, and I was excited to see what they were going to do with it, even though I've never seen a single episode of the original cartoon. And I think I can't really vouch for those who grew up with the cartoon, although reactions I have seen online, people who grew up with the cartoon actually do enjoy this movie. But I thought this movie did a good job, I feel like, of being a love letter to the original cartoon while also doing like this spiritual Who Framed Roger Rabbit sequel type movie where it's Chip and Dale interacting with the live action characters and you get these really cool visual effects with that. And I love the unique style of animations that are blended. There's 2D, CG, stop motion, puppetries even in this movie. I just think the world building in this is fantastic. And I honestly believe that this is set in the same world as Who Framed Roger Rabbit because it's the cartoon characters acting out their characters, and then they're even referred to as toons at one point. And the dip from Who Framed Roger Rabbit is even referenced. I'm like, I feel like this is in the same universe. It's never clarified, but I wouldn't be surprised if, because this movie is doing so well, somebody in Disney's like, "Yep, this is in the same world," and I'm definitely okay with that. I think the overall story and journey, like the mystery surrounding, there's like this disappearance, and Chip and Dale have to reunite to figure out what's going on. That's a little bit on the predictable side, but what makes the film work, not just the dynamic of the two characters, which are awesome, but the meta commentary and a lot of the in jokes and Easter eggs is what makes this movie really work. There's even cameos in this movie. I'm not going to spoil it here. It's already spoiled on Twitter. So be cautious on the internet. There was a couple that was unfortunately spoiled for me, but there's some cameos in this movie that honestly, it shook me that Disney got away with some of these cameos because they were absolutely amazing. Some of the stuff they joke about in this movie, it's actually pretty awesome. I will say the best laugh. There's a joke involving Seth Rogen. That's all I'll say there. That got me cracking. This movie is really enjoyable. It's, I think, currently in my top 5 movies of the year. It's definitely one I think that if you were in the camp that doesn't like movies with too much wild cameos, you might not like this. But I think because it actually does have a good story and the characters are just fun little background Easter eggs, I thought the movie was a lot of fun. I thought this was a great movie.
Bit of an unrelated note, but you brought up Seth Rogen. You know, my favorite Seth Rogen related thing, weirdly enough, is from Family Guy. There was this one episode where Peter was injected with these random things for money, like these random like vaccination type things. This was before COVID, so it had nothing to do with that. And one of the things that he was injected with was the Seth Rogen gene, where he grew out facial hair, got the scruffy hair, and they literally got Seth Rogen like to voice Peter Griffin for a few seconds. He was like, "Hey Doc," like he spoke in like the Seth Rogen like tone of voice because it was literally Seth Rogen speaking it. It's funnier. It's funnier if you actually see it with the full context, but that's low-key one of my favorite Seth Rogen moments, and it's like a 30, not even a 30-second, like a 5-second cameo, but that's one of my favorite moments of his. But this movie, the Chip and Dale movie, has just gotten better reviews than I could have ever anticipated. And it's coming from the people that brought us Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping, which I secretly love that movie, Jacob. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Nah, I didn't see that one.
You should. You would enjoy it quite a bit. I just I'm my heart is leaning me towards I gotta go see this eventually, and it's on Disney Plus, so I have no real excuse.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It might be better than you initially anticipated because it far exceeded my expectations greatly.
Absolutely. Well, as far as what I've been watching goes, it's been primarily wide release stuff, but I ended up seeing a couple movies this weekend. I ended up seeing Men, which you can see my review on the channel.
I saw that.
I want to just give a brief thank you to everyone who did check out that video because it has blown up. It is currently in the triple-digit view count, which almost never happens. And I'm not someone who stresses about views or view bags or clickbaits because I personally just hate that. But when I saw the view count, I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And so I kind of hate when I review bad movies, but I also kind of love it because I hate to talk about said movie, but at the same time, my creative juices just get flowing, and is like the jokes just get a little sharper. I can't put my finger on why that just is the case, but I had a lot of fun making that review. And thank God that this movie came out, because it's low-key a so bad it's good movie. I'm fairly patient towards A24. I give them a bit of a chance, so I'm a little more lenient, especially when it comes to their horror. However, there are two sides to A24 horror. There's the good side and the "are you serious" side. Men is definitely in the "are you serious" side of things. This movie is so serious in its message of just saying that just men can be just truly awful sometimes, which, I mean, sure, of course they can, but I mean, we as humans can be awful like all the time. It just happens. But this movie is so self-serious and beating you over the head with just how bad men are that it's honestly kind of just amazing how they bend over backwards just to scare us, when in reality, it's just the funniest comedy that I've seen all year. I would almost tell you to go see it, Jacob, just so we could tear it apart on the podcast sometime. But I like you and I like your brain cells too much, so I don't want you to lose any of them. Alex Garland is a director that I'm a fan of. If any of you have never seen Dread or Annihilation, I recommend both. They're both good. But here, he just tries way too hard to just be scary, and the desperation reeks through the screen. There are some things in here that I was just like, oh, come on, you cannot be serious. There's some very anger-inducing stuff too. I won't spoil it, but there is a priest in the movie, and let's just say Alex Garland took the whole Boston church scandal thing a little deep to heart, because wow, this priest is just a cartoon character. It made me so mad. I can't really explain it. And then there are other characters that are just so freaking silly that you just check yourself out of the movie completely, to where you're just like, is this the English countryside? Is it all just like Hot Fuzz and now this? It's like, just people are just weird in the English countryside. Like, if I take a wrong step there, I'm going to end up in a wicker statue with Christopher Lee chanting at me as the statue burns around me. But anyway, I weirdly recommend this as a so bad it's good viewing, but if you're smart, stay far away from this.
You talking about it makes me glad I stayed home to watch Chippendale Rescue Rangers instead.
Yeah. And like I said, I kind of recommend this if you're into like Plan 9 from Outer Space type of movies, or like The Room type movies. It's in that camp, in my opinion. But wow. And and I won't say who, but I saw that someone who I follow on Twitter was retweeting this story from Variety, saying that this movie opened to about a $3.3 million opening, which is honestly a bit too much for me, but there you go. And he was like, why did this make so little money? It's not a multiverse movie. It's not a predictable Marvel movie. These movies are dying. They need to, and it's just like, it honestly doesn't matter if it's a multiverse movie or it just brings back to something my friend Rachel over Rachel's Reviews says. I would rather prefer a predictable movie that's well made over an artsy fartsy movie that is terrible. Men is an artsy fartsy movie that is terrible. So bad, like so terrible, it circles around itself to be amazing again. Now, I just recently rewatched Jurassic Park and The Lost World for my Jurassic World Dominion series. And Jurassic Park is very much a man versus nature movie. Man creates something, nature takes it over and just destroys everything. You've seen it in movies like Frankenstein, the 1931 version, and countless others. But Jurassic Park has memorable dialogue, memorable characters, funny lines, incredible CGI, genuinely tense moments, amazing action. I could go on for days and days. So I would honestly prefer a predictable thing that's actually very well made instead of an experimental film that sucks. I don't know if I'm talking out of both sides of my neck on this, but that's where I stand.
Yeah, I'm kind of in similar agreement. I'm definitely in the camp that just appreciates a movie that's well made, whether it's one that's on the familiar side or it's very artistic and experimental and it succeeds. To me, as long as the movie succeeds in what it sets out to do, then I'll enjoy the movie for that.
Yeah, well, anyway, now to talk about a much better movie in every considerable fashion, Downton Abbey: A New Era. This is a review also on the channel, and as a fan of this show, I was a little nervous going into it, and this movie turned out to be a big old delight. I loved this movie, and it's and I don't know if this may be a sleeper hit in my top 10 of the year. Who really knows? It's like at one time this year, both Jackass Forever and Downton Abbey are in my top 10. I don't know what that says about me as a movie lover, but it is what it is. As a fan of this series, they treated these characters really well. They actually moved the story in directions that I did not anticipate and was honestly fine with. If you're a fan of this show, and even if you're a non-fan of the show, I do give this a modest recommendation. However, if you're not a fan, I feel like there are some Easter eggs that are just going to go a bit over your head. However, the screenwriters do a really good job of trying to break everything down and explain it. So I do give a modest recommendation here.
Yeah, like I said in our May preview, I have not seen a single episode of Downton Abbey. So the main reason why I didn't watch it was, like you said, if I went into this one and haven't not seen anything else, I figured I'd be lost on the full details of everything.
Yeah, well, let's wrap things up now by I finally rewatched The Lost World, which is also a review on the channel, and this is honestly a movie that is not perfect, but honestly, out of the Jurassic Park sequels that I've watched, this is my favorite. I have yet to see Jurassic Park 3. I've heard mixed things. I know, Jacob, you're not a super big fan of it.
It's my least favorite of the series.
But I've yet to see it, and I will be watching it sometime this week. But minus the whole InGen thing, which is just the InGen company is just the dumbest company in movie history. I mean, maybe Wayland Yutani is dumber, but like InGen is just in a whole nother league. I mean, they tried to open up a Jurassic Park in San Diego. It's like if the dinosaurs get out, then there are all the humans right there. It makes no sense. But Jeff Goldblum's really good in the movie. There's actually some pretty tense set pieces. I know how to speak that I quite enjoyed. Ultimately, I didn't think this movie was perfect, but I actually quite enjoyed this.
Yeah, I have always enjoyed The Lost World Jurassic Park. I don't really get the hate for this movie at all. I will admit, yeah, the third act is easily the weakest part. I love the idea of what they were going for, like do a Godzilla-like movie with dinosaurs. The build-up does not make sense though. To me, it just didn't really add up how they capture a T-Rex, lock it in the cargo of a boat, and yet somehow the dinosaur breaks loose and kills all the people on the boat, and then locks itself back in the cargo and then sinks itself back out. That was the biggest.
Maybe if I put myself back in the cargo hold, maybe they won't notice.
Yeah.
You're like 10,000 pounds, T-Rex. Like, what are you doing? Anyway,
that didn't add up.
Anyway, Lost World, not perfect, definitely not perfect, but it definitely moves things along in a way that I do appreciate, and I don't get most of the hate for this either. But tell us, what have you all been watching lately? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what you have to say. Anyway, Jacob, let's move on to talking about some Daredevil news. We've been recapping all of Daredevil season 1, and we'll be talking about Foggy versus Nelson, episode 10, in just a bit. But to springboard into that, The Daredevil reboot on Disney Plus has been officially confirmed, and it's been reported everywhere, but I found this article from E! News. It basically says that now that the contracts with Netflix are up and the and the Netflix shows are now on Disney Plus, it's like, all right, it's time to do this thing. And in the original report from Variety, the show is going to be helmed by Matt Corman and Chris Ord, who did this show called Covert Affairs, which I have never seen. And to be completely honest with everyone, I am incredibly concerned because I don't think Stephen DeKnight is going to be anywhere near this thing unless something changes, and it could. But I just don't know. I mean, it looks like they're gonna get Charlie Cox back. They're gonna get Vincent D'Onofrio back. Yes, and double yes. But I mean, there's something about, and Jacob, you and I have been talking about it for the past several weeks now. Something about the Netflix Daredevil that just is so perfect. It's like all the planets, the moon, and all the stars coming together in perfect alignment to create something special. And I don't know. Until I see a trailer or footage or something, I'm just going to remain cautiously optimistic, but cautious. But man, I am so worried about this. Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I guess considering the last Disney Plus show we talked about was Moon Knight, which had an amazing start, but a lackluster finish. I think we as fans want to see something amazing come out of this rebooted Daredevil. And I definitely see your concerns. I guess I'm a little concerned on it too because some of these Disney Plus shows, while I like some of them, others have been underwhelming, and I don't want Daredevil to fall in the underwhelming side of things. But I'm excited to see what they do with this at the same time. I'm just happy that they've officially made Daredevil MCU canon since he cameoed in Spider-Man No Way Home. We got to see a little bit of Wilson Fisk near the end of Hawkeye, which that was my introduction to D'Onofrio's Kingpin. Definitely a bit neutered on Hawkeye, but it was still fun seeing him, and I'm excited to see him return in the Daredevil series too. I think there's a lot of exciting things to still be excited for as a Marvel fan, especially with this news, but I think only time will tell to see if this will stack up compared to the Daredevil series we had in the past on Netflix.
Yeah, and quote, and if I am wrong and the series turns out to be awesome, then please come into the comment section here and say, well, this video didn't age well. Please go ahead and do that. But as of right now, I'm very concerned. However, at the very least, they're getting Charlie Cox back, which, I mean, considering that he was in No Way Home, that's as good a sign as any. And then they're getting Vincent D'Onofrio back, which, I mean, that's at least 2 steps in the right direction that they're doing there. So what did you all think of this Daredevil announcement? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what you have to say about it. Well, speaking of Daredevil, Jacob, let's discuss season 1, episode 10, Foggy versus Nelson. And this is an episode that I forgot how good it was. I think this is my favorite one to go back and rewatch because there is so much story told here, and it has done so incredibly well. Jacob, what say you?
Yeah, this is a really awesome episode. I think some of my favorite episodes of the series so far have been some of the more character-driven episodes, like the one that was more focused on Wilson Fisk and his past, and then the one with Stick I thought was really fascinating too. This is a really amazing episode too, which focuses on the friendship between Matt and Foggy, how they originally met, how they got into law, how they were part of a bigger company, but they didn't like the corruption that was going around, that operation. Like, we want to be more fair and balanced in this. Let's just start our own law firm and help people that way. And that's what they end up doing. And then it's also really heartbreaking to see this relationship start to fall apart when Foggy discovers that Matt is Daredevil, and he has so many ethical concerns over them. Like, He's like, Matt, why are you a lawyer when you're trying to help people, but you're doing all this vigilante work behind my back? And he doesn't really get that reasoning at all. And he thinks, Matt's been lying to him all this time about like his sight and everything. And I love the acting from both actors. They really sell it in this moment, especially the guy who plays Foggy. I thought he did an incredible job. And then some of the other side stuff. I mean, I think the side story with Ben and Karen and the whole thing with his wife, and they end up going to visit a nursing home because she's dying pretty much, and I'm like, this story is kind of going nowhere to me. And then we get to the part where they go visit the nursing home and they meet one of the patients, and that turns out to be Wilson Fisk's mom. I'm like, oh, all right, that's a good build up.
Yeah.
I forget what I said a few seconds ago. This is a really interesting little detour. I really like that.
In the words of pro wrestling announcer Jim Ross, business has just picked up.
And yeah, this is a really enjoyable episode, and I'm really curious about where it's gonna go, especially on the Wilson Fisk stuff, because he was hosting that party, and then characters start drinking champagne and they start passing out and their mouths start bubbling and foaming. I guess there was poison in the champagne, and Vanessa drank one of them, and her life is at stake now. I'm really excited. I mean, I love Wilson Fisk as a character, so if he does lose Vanessa over this, I'm sure he's going to be really, really vengeful, and I'm excited to see the wrath of Fisk. Whatever does happen. I just love just the whole building blocks of this series. It was really disheartening seeing Foggy, throw the sign that he had created of, Nelson and Murdoch for the law firm and just throw it in the basket because he was so angry of what he just found out. I'm sure they're going to resolve by the end of the season, but man, that was such a powerful episode. I love these character building episodes that, examine these characters, kind of deconstruct them in a little bit of a way, and creates a pretty powerful gut punch of an episode. And I'm excited to see where the series goes from here.
Yeah, I love the scene where Matt is telling Foggy the story of how of him beating up the dude who abused his child, and it's just, you kind of see where Foggy's in the right, but you can also see where Matt's in the right. There is no clear right answer. It's like Michelangelo from the Ninja Turtles once said, he's right, they're both right. and they kind of are.
I agree with that.
It's a situation where there's nuance to it, and it's like you can get from either perspective, and you can kind of understand because Foggy feels betrayed because it was like, could you do this the right way? Because they were almost there at Landon and Zach. Like, there's the great scene where they're in that POS office and they're just like plugging away, and it's like, we're on track to make partner. And I love Foggy's delivery here, where it's like, this is what we always talked about, where it's like steel and metal, it's going to be great, and why are you giving me that look? I just love that line delivery. And Matt's like, I've been reading some Thurgood Marshall, and Foggy's like, not Marshall. I love that little back and forth between the two of them. And Matt convinces them to go solo, and it's like, it's so good. This show is so friggin' good. It's so good. And there's only 3 episodes left in this season, and from what my memory is, it's about to get even crazier than when we first started. So I throw it to all of you. Have you seen this episode? What did you think about it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what you have to say about it. Well, Jacob, before we get into the main event, let's dive into one more piece of business. The Mission Impossible 7 teaser trailer, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, dropped this afternoon. And I think we're both big Mission Impossible fans around here, and so this trailer was awesome. It didn't show too much, which is honestly what I wanted from it, but I don't know if you picked up on this, but I'm sure that the dude that Ethan is talking to in the beginning is Kittredge from the first Mission Impossible. And I was sitting there like, is that Kittredge? And I was just like if that is, then that is crazy levels of continuity. But this is just a teaser trailer. It's literally just Tom Cruise doing Tom Cruise things and the rest of the cast doing their things as well. And Tom Cruise jumping off of a bike off of a cliff and just me having a heart attack for him, just being like, just open your parachute, open your parachute, open your parachute. Anyway, Jacob, you love this trailer, right?
I really love this trailer. And yes, I think that was Kittredge that we saw in the trailer because I do recognize that actor. And I was like, yeah, I like that they are actually going back to the first movie with certain aspects of the trailer. There's another aspect. There's an action scene where Tom Cruise is on top of a train. I guess that was another callback to the first movie as well. I'm really excited for this movie. I agree with all of those reasons, Ryan, you brought up. I like that, they didn't really detail much of the plot, and it focused more so a tease of some of the action set pieces in the movie. And I'm so excited. I'm always excited to see a new Mission Impossible movie. It's crazy that we're 7 movies in, and this franchise hasn't lost its staying power yet compared to other franchises where I feel like the Fast and Furious franchise, I feel like in comparison, peaked already. Like it peaked after 7 for me. Here, like it just keeps grinding and grinding and grinding, and I don't know if they're going to top what Fallout did, as that's to date the best of the Mission Impossible movies. But I'm so hyped for this. I'm excited to see the stunt with Tom Cruise going off the cliff. I know this Haley Atwell apparently is in this movie. I'm excited to see her outside of an MCU film hanging out with Tom Cruise. I think this has all the ingredients to be another amazing, amazing action blockbuster, and it might top Fallout. We'll see. I don't know if it will, but if it's on the same level, I'll be a happy camper.
Well, we got Fallout in 2018, so this is a movie that's 5 years in the making. Even without COVID, we've been waiting 3.5 years for this. So, I mean, Tom Cruise is one of those dudes to where, like, he normally makes it worth it, and God bless him, he's going to put his body on the line for us, and just, it's going to be amazing to watch. But anyway, what did you all think of this trailer? Leave your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment of the trailer? And it was definitely the cliff moment. I think we can all agree on that.
Yep.
By the way, Ghost Protocol is the best one. But anyway, Jacob, let's get into the main event of the evening. Last week on the podcast, I found an article called 18 of the Greatest Movies That Were Never Made. Well, I found an article with even more great movies that were never made from even bigger names, or modern names, if you will. So I thought it would have been fun to dive into that list right here and now. So, Jacob, are you ready?
All right, I'm ready for part 2.
Part 2, let's rock and roll. First up, Spike Lee's Jackie Robinson biopic. This is, from what reading in this article, this is something that he had been wanting to do for a very long time, but just due to other things popping up, he just never got around to it. He dropped the screenplay for this online in 2020 during the lockdown when everything was shut down. He just says, like, here's the Jackie Robinson script I was working on. Go ahead and read it. I actually did read some of it. Not going to lie, it's actually pretty interesting. We did end up getting a Jackie Robinson movie in 42, which I thought was a very good biopic. But seeing as though we could have had a Spike Lee directed Jackie Robinson movie, Jacob, what say you?
Yeah, that does sound interesting. I can't say I'm that well versed in Spike Lee's filmography, but he can do biopics very well. If you've seen Malcolm X, that's a phenomenal movie. He put his heart and soul into making that movie work and getting you invested in this guy's life story. And I dare say it's Denzel Washington's best performance by a country mile. I have seen 42. That's as good of a Jackie Robinson movie as you can get. That could have easily been a generic sports movie, but you got the Jackie Robinson story, which is a very inspiring story, and you have the late Chadwick Boseman playing Jackie Robinson. That whole thing elevated it to a much higher emotional level for me. And fun fact, I actually saw that in theaters during the midst of COVID after Chadwick Boseman sadly passed away. And that was an amazing experience to see. I love seeing that for the first time on a theater screen. It would have been interesting, I guess, to see what Spike Lee would have done with this. I think he would have made it very awesome as well. I guess now that we got 42, I think I'm okay with that being the definitive Jackie Robinson movie. But Spike Lee doing one, I think, would have been interesting. That's for sure.
I agree. And like you said, 42 is about as good a Jackie Robinson movie as we will probably ever get. Just to put a bow on this one, Spike Lee was eyeing Denzel Washington to play Jackie Robinson, but Denzel turned it down because he felt he was too old for the role. And I mean, it's a solid piece of self-awareness from old Denzel, but it would have been fascinating to see what would have happened there. Next on the list, this is David Cronenberg's Eastern Promises sequel. Now, I have never seen Eastern Promises, but it's apparently starred Viggo Mortensen, and it even got him an Oscar nomination. But I think we can touch on this one. I don't think either of us have seen Eastern Promises, so
No.
can't really say. But I mean, David Cronenberg is definitely one of those directors where you're just like, well, that's a David Cronenberg movie, all right. He definitely like makes his own type of movie, like The Fly, Eraserhead, so on and so forth.
Yeah, actually, I think Eraserhead was David Lynch.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Fly was definitely for sure David Cronenberg.
Yeah. See, I haven't even seen a single one of his movies. I've been meaning to check some of them out. I know The Fly has been on my radar for a good while, but I just haven't gotten around to seeing any of his movies. I can't really vouch for this one. I've never even heard of the original movie, but uh, there's not much for me to say if I'm that excited to see what the sequel could have been when I've never seen the original movie. So I guess for now it's a pass.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, next up is Steven Spielberg's Ghost Stories starring Tom Cruise. Now this would have been released in 2000, or well, this would have started production in 2002, and this is based on a book written by Hampton Sides, and it would have told the story of three American survivors of the Bataan Death March. Now, considering that it stars Tom Cruise and it takes place in World War II and is directed by Steven Spielberg, I mean, that's a win right there. What say you?
Yeah, that is definitely a win for me. It's always baffled me that Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise haven't done that many more collaborations because when they did, the movies turned out to be excellent. Like Minority Report, a movie not too many people talk about these days. It's top five Spielberg for me. It is one of my absolute favorites. It is, and I do have a little bit more issues with War of the Worlds, but I think that's an awesome movie as well. I think just the combination of the actor and director on that alone, I would have loved to have seen another collaboration with these two.
Yeah, Minority Report is just fantastic. If any of you have never seen it, I highly recommend that one as well. But from what I've read in the article, it was just a matter of scheduling conflicts. Both were just doing other things, so it just could never happen. But I mean, Cruise is still acting, Spielberg is still directing, so you never really know.
Yep, and that could be Tom Cruise's next project when he's done with Mission Impossible.
That is true. Well, next up on the list is the Halo movie, which was supposed to be helmed by was at different times Peter Jackson, Neil Blomkamp, and Guillermo del Toro. Now, Halo is the video game franchise. We all know what that is. And it ended up getting made as a series on Paramount Plus, which I have not seen, but I've heard actually some solid things about it. But from what I've been able to read, it was just a matter of the script just not being right for what it is. And I think this was a big missed opportunity. Halo was a big deal when I was younger. Like there was so many people playing Halo, so I'm honestly surprised that a Halo movie just never happened, and anything Halo related never happened until just recently. I think that was a big missed opportunity. But I think we can both agree that if anyone were to direct this Halo movie, I think Peter Jackson would be our number one choice.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the three directors, I think I would have been the most interested to see what Peter Jackson would have done to get us into another world with these characters and getting us set up what I guess what could have been a great franchise because he did the Lord of the Rings so well. The other two directors I think would have been interesting too. Neil Blomkamp did District 9, which is an awesome movie. I don't know how he'd do with a franchise because he's more known for original stories, but I think he would have been interesting to see what he would have done. Guillermo del Toro, I think, would have been neat as well, but he's more of an artistic director as well. I think Peter Jackson, I think, would have fit the mold into making something work with this material. I've never actually played the Halo games personally, but I think if Peter Jackson had made this movie, that would have sold me on day one because Lord of the Rings is like top two movie trilogies for me.
If anyone could make anything feel epic, it's Peter Jackson, that is for certain. Well, next on the list is an Edgar Allan Poe biopic, which would have been produced by, well, Jacob, I want you to take a wild guess. Take a wild guess as to who would have produced this.
Edgar Allan Poe. Let's see. Tim Burton.
Nope.
Oh, Martin Scorsese.
Nope.
All right, let's see. One more guess. It's probably somebody you wouldn't expect. Let me think. Quentin Tarantino.
Nope. Sylvester Stallone.
Oh,
I
oh
cannot make that up. I'm reading it right now.
wow.
To quote the article directly, Sylvester Stallone has been trying to get a movie about Edgar Allan Poe off the ground for nearly 25 years. And this article was written, just for context, just earlier this year. So this has been a long thing that Stallone has wanted to do. And he even wanted Robert Downey Jr. to play the title character, which, I mean, that's a solid choice right there. So
Yeah.
Stallone, at the very least, had his actor chosen correctly. But someone as unique as Edgar Allan Poe was, I'm honestly surprised that the only movie we have about him is The Raven, starring John Cusack. It's a bit of a mediocre movie, but it's surprising that we haven't gotten anything about Poe in just forever.
Yeah, this is really interesting development. I'm familiar with some of Edgar Allan Poe's works. I think a biopic on him would be incredibly fascinating. And I think because he was such a weird dude, I think you could do like an unreliable narrator bit with it. And I think it would make the story all the more interesting. Stallone making it, though, is just such an odd choice because you see him. I mean, he's done directing projects. Like, he directed most of the Rocky sequels. He directed, like, Rambo 4. I think he directed like one of the Expendables movies. So he's more of an action director. I just can't see him doing a biopic. That's just weird. Although if Robert Downey Jr. plays him, I think there's some potential there. He definitely needs something post MCU because the Doolittle movie was other trash. we need a good Robert Downey Jr.
Oh God, the Doolittle movie! Please don't remind me. That movie was so god awful. But I mean, Stallone has won an Oscar. I mean, he directed most of the Rocky movies, like you mentioned. So this dude is not some like simpleton. He knows what he's doing behind the camera. But I don't know. I mean, props to him for being passionate about this guy. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, Stallone and Downey are both still alive. So, I mean, there's definitely a chance that it could still happen. But it's just, I don't know. Talk about a weird flex. Am I right? Well, next up is a Howard Hughes biopic, which would have been directed by Christopher Nolan. Now, we ended up getting a Howard Hughes biopic in the form of The Aviator from Martin Scorsese. So it did happen, and this was supposed to be Nolan's movie. However, he ended up leaving to do a little movie called Batman Begins. So, I mean, everything worked out. But fascinating to think that Nolan's form of like telling different sections of a story at one time, kind of storytelling. It's been so interesting to apply to someone who is just out there as Howard Hughes was. I mean, he was kind of like the Elon Musk of the 30s, if you really think about it.
Yeah, I think Nolan could have made a really fascinating movie on Howard Hughes because of how he does nonlinear storytelling, considering some of the different stuff he did in his life, like him being a filmmaker and being, the aviator, and then, he got a little crazy near the end with his OCD, and that went really insane if you've seen the Martin Scorsese film. I think Nolan would have been interesting with this, but at the same time, I feel like if he made this, he wouldn't have done Batman Begins. So I guess it's a good thing he didn't direct the movie because he went and made one of my favorite comic book trilogies. And I'm happy we got the Martin Scorsese, The Aviator, because that was such an awesome movie and it's in my top 10 Scorsese. So I think that one just played out well for me.
Just like I always say, everything happens for a reason. Well, next up is a movie called Sweetheart, which would have been directed by Patty Jenkins. In between Monster and Wonder Woman, this would have been released. And it would have been about a female assassin who plans on leaving the killing business only to get pulled back after her high school reunion. This would have been set. Jenkins came on board about May 2014, but left due to creative differences, which is also how she ended up leaving Thor 2, which was interesting. Just based on that premise alone, and Patty Jenkins, what say you?
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie that made her a renowned director, that movie Monster. All I know is it gave Charlize Theron an Oscar, so I can't vouch for that movie. I love Wonder Woman, though. Fantastic movie, still one of my favorite films in the DCU. And I know a lot of people crap on the sequel, 84. I personally enjoy it, even though it's definitely not as good as the original, and there's definitely some flaws. I do enjoy Wonder Woman 84 for what it is. So for me, whenever I see a director make a project or attempt to make one that does not happen, it doesn't materialize for various reasons, it's always saddening to me. I think this one actually sounded pretty interesting. And I think, obviously, there's still a chance she can still resurrect this project down the line, as she has a lot of interesting ideas in the pipeline. I think this one could be it could be interesting. I'm intrigued by this one. I definitely need to check out Monster sometime to see some of her smaller projects, but this one intrigues me through the premise alone.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of reminds me of this movie called Grosse Point Blank, which is kind of about a similar theme, but it stars John Cusack and Dan Aykroyd about a hitman who goes to his high school reunion. But I'm sure Sweetheart would have been a totally different thing. Well, next up, and this is probably something that you might have heard of, Batman Year One, directed by Darren Aronofsky. This would have taken place, or would have been released uh, uh, after Aronofsky had done Pi and Requiem for a Dream, which if you've not seen Requiem for a Dream, oh boy. I have a full review of it on the channel now, but uh, considering that Batman Year One is one of my favorite Batman stories, I'm honestly surprised that we haven't gotten a full-fledged Batman Year One story. I think Batman Begins is about as close as we'll ever get to a Batman Year One, if that is fair to say. But Batman and Darren Aronofsky, Jacob, does that sound intriguing?
It's definitely intriguing. I don't know if it would turn out well for many people, as his movies are very divisive, and I'm sure Aronofsky would have gone the artsy fartsy route with Batman like he does with a lot of his other movies, but I think he would have made an interesting character study. I think I had seen some other videos on this unplanned, this Batman Year One movie he was going to do. I think it would have been hard R, and I think if I'm not mistaken, I think he wanted Walking Phoenix to play Batman, which, considering he later would play the Joker, that's interesting casting when you think about it. It's it's really hard buying him as Batman since we know he made a good Joker. It's like, why would you want him to play Batman? That's just weird. But I think it would have been interesting, and a part of me kind of wish we had got this, but at the same time, I love Batman Begins and Nolan's trilogy, so maybe it was for the best this didn't get made because people complain about Zack Snyder's DCU movies. I'm sure if Aronofsky did one, it might be even more toxic than what the Zack Snyder stuff is.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you have ever seen that movie Mother from Aronofsky, but
Yeah, that one was weird.
weird stuff. Next up is Slaughterhouse-Five, based on the book of the same name, which would have been directed by Guillermo del Toro. We're hearing his name quite a bit on this list, in case you couldn't tell. But would have been based on the book by Kurt Vonnegut, which I'll just read a bit of the plot. It follows the life and experiences of Billy Pilgrim from his early years to his time as an American soldier and chaplain's assistant during World War II, to the post-war years with Billy occasionally traveling through time. And this is semi-autobiographical, based on Vonnegut's time in World War II. And considering that, and considering Del Toro would have been behind it, I mean, I would have been at the very least interesting. I haven't read the book myself. I've always wanted to, but I mean, it seems interesting. It's like Del Toro is like, I'm on this, then I'm not. It's like, I'm doing this, then I'm not. But I mean, the things that he has actually done have all been solid. So maybe he's like looking into the future himself and being like, oh, that may not work out so well for me. Here, Shape of Water, let's do that. Like, I'll take my Oscar now. Like, maybe he's onto something.
Yeah, that story does sound interesting. I'm not familiar with the book, but again, I'm a fan of Guillermo del Toro, and I think any project that he would have done, he usually does a really good job on, especially with the way he visualizes everything. So I'm sure this movie, even though it sounds like it'd be more of a war movie, which is definitely a departure from other Guillermo del Toro films, but I think he would have made an interesting war movie out of it. I definitely would have been interested in seeing it on the Del Toro name alone.
Yeah, I agree. Well, next up is Ronnie Rocket, which would have been directed by David Lynch. And let me just read this directly from the article. This would have been a follow-up after Eraserhead. The planned follow-up movie followed a one-legged detective who enters another dimension and gets stalked by a 3-foot-tall dwarf who can control electricity. Do you need me to read that again?
No, that's weird.
And let me read the next sentence. Unsurprisingly, Lynch struggled to find a studio that would take a chance on such a bizarre story. In other words, the grass is green.
Which you say that, and I'm surprised he got Eraserhead made because I've seen that movie. I didn't like it. It was just an acid trip. The movie made no sense to me. It was so grotesque. I did not care about what I was watching. I know some people like it, and they have their interpretation of the movie. For me, it was just pretentious for the sake of being pretentious. And I like having a little bit of context with what I'm watching, and this had none. And so I didn't like it. I like some of the more, I guess, intimate stories David Lynch has made. I love The Straight Story. If you haven't seen that, that's a G-rated Disney movie David Lynch made in 1999, and that is a fantastic character movie. I don't know if I would be on board with watching this Red Rocket movie, considering I don't like Eraserhead. So I guess it's a pass for me.
Yeah, Straight Story is really good, and I also recommend Twin Peaks as well. That's a series that we should cover on this show eventually. But next up is Dino, which would have been directed by Martin Scorsese. And this is This would have been the movie about Dean Martin, and it basically had Tom Hanks as Martin, John Travolta as Frank Sinatra, plus Hugh Grant, Adam Sandler, and Jim Carrey. And this would have obviously been the life of Dean Martin. We all know who he is.
Yeah.
This is a heavy thumbs up for me. I mean, I'm not a humongous Dean Martin fan, but what I have seen of him, he was a genuinely talented human being. And considering that Scorsese would have been providing it, I'll take 5.
2 thumbs up for me. Although I'm a little. You said Tom Hanks is Dean Martin.
Yes.
That sounds interesting. Would Tom Hanks have done his own singing though? That would have been.
Hmm.
That would have been interesting because I can't imagine Tom Hanks singing, especially since Dean Martin had such a croony type voice. Tom Hanks, I don't know, but John Travolta, I think, would have nailed Frank Sinatra. Though you said he would have played him. I think John Travolta would have nailed it since he did Grease, but I don't know about Tom Hanks. That would have been my biggest hurdle. As much as I love Tom Hanks, I'd be a little skeptical if he could not sing the part of Dean Martin unless they did the dub route, and I think that'd be a different story. But I prefer these biopics where the actors do their own singing and transform into the real artists, like with Walking Phoenix as Johnny Cash and Taron Egerton as Elton John, which were both amazing performances in their amazing movies. But I would still be on board with seeing this just for the Scorsese name alone. Plus, I do enjoy me some Dean Martin. So,
yeah, and if Russell Crowe thinks he can sing, then what's stopping Tom Hanks?
yeah.
Well, anyway, let's move on to Jane's Got a Gun, directed by Lynn Ramsey. Now, just to read the article here, the behind-the-scenes drama on Jane Got a Gun made headlines in 2013 when director Lynn Ramsey refused to show up on the first day of production and then dropped out of the movie after spending a year in development. Oh boy, well, that sounds amazing. But I'm not sure the plot of this. I know of this movie called Jane Got a Gun, which I do believe starred Natalie Portman.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about that one.
But let me look that up on IMDb.
Is that the same story or?
There's a Jane Got a Gun movie that was released in 2015. It was directed by Gavin O'Connor, and it starred Natalie Portman, Joel Edgerton, and Ewan McGregor. A woman asks her ex-lover for help in order to save her outlaw husband from a gang out to kill him. This is a 5.9 out of 10 on IMDb and a 49 Metascore. Not exactly the best, but I mean, it sounds intriguing at the very least.
Yeah, I didn't know Gavin O'Connor directed that movie.
I did not either, but I mean, honestly, you can make a movie about a lot of the troubled productions that go on here. And I know Heart of Darkness was the documentary of Apocalypse Now, but honestly, a movie about the making of Apocalypse Now, I'd be there day one. I don't know about you.
Yeah, same here. That is like probably the most insane, crazy production history of a movie that I think I've ever even heard of. And that demands its own movie.
Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola actually had a gun on the set because he was thinking of ending it all. That's how bad it went. Thank God that it was very well received and made its money back. So there that is.
Yeah.
The next one on the list was At the Mountain of Madness from Guillermo del Toro, which we covered in part 1. Next up is Spike Lee's Save Us, Joe Louis. This would have been about the boxer Joe Louis. And let me just read the article here. A drama about the rivalry between eponymous African-American boxer Joe Louis and German fighter Max Schmeling that took place just before World War II. Just from that alone, that gets a thumbs up from me. I mean, it doesn't matter what director you put in there, just the fact that an American boxer fought a German boxer in, like, let's say 1936, 37, mean, that sounds amazing right there.
Yeah, that does sound like an interesting story, and I would have been interested in seeing it as well, just to see this piece of history play out in the movie. Regardless whether it's Spike Lee or anybody else, this story sounds awesome.
Yeah, well, next up is Quentin Tarantino's Killer Crow. This would have been a spin off of the massive original script from his movie Inglourious Bastards. It tells the story of Brad Pitt's character, Aldo Rain, coming across a platoon of black soldiers called the Killer Crows. They would have been on the hunt to take out the white officers who screwed them over in the military. I mean, considering Tarantino was gung ho on only making 10 movies, I'm surprised he passed up on this one. But just from that alone, does that sound interesting?
Yeah, that actually does sound interesting. And Glorious is one of my favorite Tarantino movies, and Brad Pitt was one of the standout scene stealers of that movie. So a spinoff movie centering around him, that would have been my cup of tea. I don't know if it would have topped the original, but mixing his Aldo Rain character with Quentin Tarantino's direction, I think you could have made something amazing out of this.
Yeah, we're in the gnats killing business.
Yeah.
Anyway, sticking with Tarantino, next up on the list is Quentin Tarantino's Double V Vega. This would have been in the same universe as Reservoir Dogs and would confirm the theory that Vincent Vega in Pulp Fiction, John Travolta's character, and Michael Madsen's character in Reservoir Dogs would have had the same name of Vega. They would have been brothers. However, the movie never got made because both actors thought they were too old to do it. I'd actually heard of this one, and honestly, out of all the ones that Tarantino passed over, this is the one that kind of bums me out the most because I love Pulp Fiction, and I love Reservoir Dogs, and to see that universe one more time, I don't know, it just would have been fascinating to me. What say you?
Yeah, that one actually does sound fascinating too. Pulp Fiction's an amazing movie, one of my favorites from Tarantino. Reservoir Dog is pretty good too. And I think, Travolta's character and Michael Madsen's characters are two of the most interesting aspects of both movies. I think it would have been interesting that they would have been brothers if they did the crossover movie together. I think that actually had so much potential. And it's a shame that the movie never got made because I would have loved to have seen it as well.
I would have loved to have seen John Travolta do this at least one more time, Well, next up is Baz Luhrmann's Alexander the Great epic. Now, this sounds exactly like it sounds, I would imagine. Baz Luhrmann directing an Alexander the Great movie. It's going to be interesting to see because we're getting Baz Luhrmann's Elvis movie in a couple of weeks. So it's going to be interesting to see what he would have done with someone as legendary as Alexander the Great. But just covering someone that literally conquered all of the known world. I believe, if my quote from Iron Man is correct, Alexander the Great conquered everything from the Pacific Ocean to the Ukraine, which is pretty big. So it would have been interesting to see. And we ended up getting an Alexander the Great movie, which I've not seen, but I've heard it's not particularly good. But considering Baz Luhrmann and Alexander the Great, does that intrigue you?
Alexander the Great's a fascinating figure, but I don't think Baz Luhrmann sounds like the right choice to helm the movie because he's more of a musical director. That's why I'm excited to see the Elvis movie because I think he's going to pull that off musically. Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite musicals of all time. You know what else Baz Luhrmann directed? I think one of his first movies, he directed a weird adaptation of Romeo and Juliet starring Leonardo DiCaprio where they replace
Romeo plus Juliet.
Yeah, that one. And they replace swords with guns. They modernize the story and they still talk in that old Shakespeare dialect, like during the 14th century or something.
When they're listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, it's the weirdest thing.
It's so jarring, and it doesn't make sense. Like, if you modernize a story, you should modernize the dialogue along with it. But I digress.
At least at least West Side Story got that idea right.
Yeah, I love West Side Story. It was done well twice. The this I don't know about this one. I think the idea of making a biopic about this figure, I think, is good. I don't know if Bowes is the right fit, though. I don't think it just doesn't sound right to me. Get somebody that knows how to make epic stories like this. Like maybe get trying to think off the top of my head, especially working today. I don't know,
Mm,
Peter Jackson or
Peter Jackson would have
uh,
been a good choice.
Peter Jackson or Ridley Scott or somebody like that.
Yeah, those are two good names, but it would be interesting because, like I said, Alexander the Great is someone who is just endlessly fascinating. But next up is Catherine Bigelow's Company of Angels, which would have been another retelling of the story of Joan of Arc. This movie was doing well, but then it fell apart as soon as Luc Besson was brought on as executive producer, and he wanted Mila Jovovich to play Joan of Arc. I'm sure Mila Jovovich is a nice person, but just no to that casting choice all day long. So that movie just fell apart from there. But I mean, what say you?
Actually, I've seen a little bit of the movie with Mila Jovovich as Joan of Arc. I watched a little bit of that in middle school, and that movie is actually not that bad. I actually thought her performance was actually pretty compelling at times. It's one of her better performances. That and The Fifth Element, I thought she was good in both those movies.
Oh,
So
interesting. I was thinking because I had seen a Joan of Arc movie starring Lily Sobieski, which I had seen. I can't remember where, but I did see that and I did enjoy that. But honestly, looking at the article here, I was like, oh yeah, that actually did happen. But
yeah, but yeah, Catherine Bigelow would have done great if she had made it because she was an awesome director. I love, especially Point Break was a fantastic action movie she made in the '90s. She just has this really amazing knack of doing these very visceral stories. I know she's more doing these more based on true stories, very serious, very grounded movies like The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. But I think that style of direction I think could have worked in Joan of Arc, especially considering some of the more tragic layers of the story near the end. I think it could be a pretty emotional movie.
yeah, I agree. And at the very least, the battle sequences would have been awesome. I mean, if you've ever seen Zero Dark 30, that ending, my goodness,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like Bin Laden dies at the end, but at the same time you're just kind of like, I hope they get out of this okay. And it's so good, it's so well.
Very suspenseful.
Yes, absolutely. Well, next up is Kerry Fukunaga's It. Now we've gotten an It already. This Andy Muschietti has done It and It Chapter 2, so we all know how that goes. But Muschietti would end up leaving in 2015 due to creative differences. But considering that he directed No Time to Die, I mean, at the very least, it would have been interesting to see what his take was. I don't know. What say you?
Yeah, I don't know much from this director outside of No Time to Die. So I guess it's a good thing he didn't do it because he got to direct one of the best James Bond movies in recent years. But at the same time, I guess it would have been interesting to see what he would have done. I'm glad we got the two movies we got with the director we got because especially at chapter one. At chapter one was a lightning in a bottle phenomenon of a movie that definitely did a great job of, retelling the story to a new generation and doing, I guess, the more definitive story of Pennywise the clown and the kids that band together to try to take him out. At chapter two, I didn't think was near as good, but I didn't hate it the most. But this other director, that Carey guy, I think I'm glad he did No Time to Die because that movie was awesome. That's all I'll say there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, The next couple on the list are both by David Fincher, so I'm going to group them together. First up, he would have directed an Elliot Ness graphic novel adaptation. It would have been called Rendezvous with Rama, and it would have starred Morgan Freeman. And the next one would have been an adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now, I love the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea movie from Disney from the 60s. That movie is awesome. So it would have been nice to see what Fincher would have brought to the table there. And it would have been awesome to see what he would have done with an Elliot Ness type story. I'm a fan of both of these.
Yeah, I don't know much about the Elliot Ness stuff, but him doing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea would have been interesting. I definitely would have loved to have seen that. I especially would have been fascinated about who he would have cast as Captain Nemo, as that is such a fascinating, morally complex character. I love James Mason's performance in the Disney version, so it definitely would have been hard to top what he did in the past, but I'm sure Fincher would have done an amazing job at bringing that character to life had that project come to fruition.
Yeah, it would have been fantastic. I mean, Fincher is of pretty good quality, so I would have imagined that they would have been at the very least good. But the next couple on the list we covered in part one, George Miller's Justice League and Ridley Scott's Blood Meridian. Next up, and this is probably something that the two of us are very familiar with, the Ant-Man movie, which would have been directed by Edgar Wright. Now, there are still people who are like, oh, Edgar Wright would have made the Ant-Man movie so much better. Considering that the Ant-Man movie is at the very least, like, really fun, I mean, I'm struggling to see what Edgar Wright would have done any different. I mean, I love Edgar Wright, don't get that twisted, but I mean, after the Cornetto trilogy, he ended up doing Baby Driver and Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So I don't think that's too much of. I think I'm not crying too much for him. He landed on his feet, but I don't know, Jacob. What say you?
Yeah, I've talked about this several times before with different people. Edgar Wright, I think, would have done an amazing job had he had done Ant-Man. There's no getting around that. And even in the final cut of the movie, since he spent a good like 10 years working on that movie, like a lot of his story drafts made it in the final cut. And you can definitely see some of that in the final cut of the film, especially some of the transitional pieces and Michael Pena's ad libbing. I think those were some ideas that Edgar Wright had in the movie. I think had he had directed the film, I'm sure it would have been better. However, the version we got, directed by Peyton Reed, was still pretty good at the end of the day. I still like that movie. And I do feel like had Edgar Wright had not done, or had Edgar Wright had not left Ant-Man, we probably wouldn't have got Baby Driver, which is to date my favorite out of all of Edgar Wright's movies. That movie was an amazing action movie that blended its genres so well with action. There's a little bit of musical elements in there as well. I don't think Baby Driver would have been a thing had he stayed and done Ant-Man. So maybe there was a greater plan for Edgar Wright at the end of the day because Baby Driver was awesome.
Like I said, everything happens for a reason. Next up is The Little Mermaid, directed by Sofia Coppola. This would have been this would have been leaning more into the darker side of things from the original Hans Christian Andersen story, and she didn't want to work with the studio to compromise her vision. She is definitely a Coppola. So, with that in mind, Jacob, yes or no?
I don't know if I can picture Sofia Coppola directing The Little Mermaid. I've seen some of her other movies. They're a lot smaller and more intimate. Like if you've seen Lost in Translation, that is actually a really good smaller scale movie set in Japan with Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson. I can't really picture her doing a more bigger budget visual effects movie with a mermaid. I just can't picture that. I mean, she could go out of her wheelhouse if she wanted to, but I don't know about that one. I think it would have been a little artsy fartsy at the same time, and I wasn't that big a fan of the Beguiled, which she made a couple of years ago. So
I
I
never
don't
saw
know.
it, but it looked incredibly weird. But next up is an adaptation of Harold and the Purple Crayon. And Jacob, take a guess who would have directed this.
It's got to be somebody weird.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Watch
He's
that be like David Lynch or somebody.
no, but he's directed a ton of music videos.
Michael Bay.
Nope.
I know he did. Um, okay, I'll try to do one more. Who else? Uh, what's it? Mick G. Didn't he do a lot of music videos?
He did, but no, it would have been Spike Jones.
Spike Jones.
Yeah, that guy.
That's the and that the Where the Wild Things Are
Where
guy.
the Wild Things Are, her, that's him.
Oh wow. Isn't that like a preschool story?
Yeah, it's he after Where the Wild Things Are, that's the next movie that he wanted to do. I guess he was on a big children's book kick
Which
that
which I've only seen Where the Wild Things Are. I actually need to rewatch it though because people massively praise that movie. I think I might have been a little too young to appreciate it, but to me it was just weird that he took a basic children's story and made like this very dark, intimate drama out of it, which I thought was a little pretentious personally. But the original story is great. I love it. I don't know if I don't know how he would have done the purple crayon. I think he's too artsy of a director to do something like that. And I'm not even that big a fan of Where the Wild Things Are, his movie. I remember like seeing the trailer back in 2009 and being genuinely disturbed by how he designed the wild things in that movie. So I don't think he was the right fit.
well, if it would have been directed by Spike Jones, you'd be calling it genius. And anyway, next up is Terrence Malick's Che Guevara biopic. Now, Che Guevara is an interesting character. Like a lot of people in the socialist persuasion hold him up as like a pretty big figure. I've only watched a couple of videos about him. He seems like an interesting guy, but interesting considering that Terrence Malick really the I don't think he's really made and adapted anything really, if my memory serves, unless I'm forgetting something. But considering the fact that Terrence Malick makes these very like slow, thoughtful movies, it'd been interesting to see what he would have done with a Shay movie.
Yeah, see, I don't know much about the actual person, so I don't think I have a real opinion on that aspect of the story. But Terrence Malick's an interesting director, though. I've only seen two of his movies. Badlands, which was his first movie, is actually really, really good. It's definitely, I don't think, as near as slow as some of the movies people know him for today. But it's a really fascinating like character study of like these teenagers who go on a killing spree, and it was actually very fascinating. One of the slower movies I did see, Days of Heaven, hated it. Thought it was too pretentious. I don't even know what he was going for there. I don't even remember the plot of that movie. So I don't know how he would have done this story, especially since I don't know the real person. I don't know if he'd make it very pretentious or make it really thoughtful. I guess you can go in between. I don't know. I haven't seen any of his later films like The Tree of Life or anything like that. But yeah, it's interesting.
I've heard good things about his latest movie, A Hidden Life. I've heard good things. I've wanted to watch that. But next up is Steven Soderbergh's Lenny Riefenstahl movie. Now, Lenny Riefenstahl made a little movie called The Triumph of the Will, which, if any of you have ever heard of it, it's insane Nazi propaganda. It was literally a movie made in Nazi Germany for Nazi Germany. And Soderbergh would have made it from Riefenstahl's perspective, I suppose. And I don't, and it would have been made with his go-to screenwriter Scott Burns, who he worked on with Contagion, which is a great kind of pandemic thriller. If any of you aren't too like burned out from COVID, I recommend you check that out. But I don't know much about Triumph of the Will outside of the subject matter, but I don't know. It would have been interesting. I love Argo. I love movies about making movies. If that doesn't sound weird at all.
Yeah, this actually does sound fascinating. I don't have any real intent on seeing the original movie for obvious reasons, but a movie about the making of that infamous movie definitely sounds up my alley. And I think Soderbergh, he's a really good director. I love the Ocean's trilogy and Logan Lucky. I've not seen Contagion. I wanted to see it for the longest time. I thought it was weird that movie trended around the height of COVID. I just felt like that was in a little bit poor taste. But I think now that that's kind of died down, I'll definitely have to check that one out. I think this would have been interesting because Soderbergh's a good director and the subject matter had a lot of potential. So I guess that's a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see an Albert Speer movie one day, that Hitler's go-to architect. I mean, that's just me personally. I think Speer is fascinating. But next up, and we only have a few more left, is Hayao Miyazaki's Ponyo sequel. He was heavily considering making a Ponyo sequel, and it never got off the ground. Having now actually seen Ponyo, talking about me, I would have loved to have seen a Ponyo sequel. And since Miyazaki is coming back, probably because Earwig and the Witch was so bad that he was like, all right, son, let me show you how it's done. I mean, I think there's still room that he might actually want to do it.
Yeah, Ponyo is not one of my absolute favorite Miyazaki films. It's a sweet story, but there's just some weird stuff in that movie that just takes me out of the whole narrative. Like the mom's really bad driving and Ponyo's obsession with ham. Some of those tiny elements, I'm like, what is this movie? It's really weird. But I think if he wanted to make a Ponyo sequel, I would have checked it out because he's a fantastic director who has a lot of imagination in his stories. And I think it would have been interesting had he had done the sequel. So Ponyo's not one of my favorites, but I would have seen the sequel because Miyazaki would have directed it.
Yeah, I'm just glad Miyazaki's making a comeback, at least just for one movie. Well, next up is Lynn Ramsey. There's that name again. Lynn Ramsey's The Lovely Bones. Now, this movie would end up getting made with Peter Jackson directing it. I personally have not seen it. However, considering Lynn Ramsey's penchant to make more darker movies, see, we need to talk about Kevin if you want to feel bad about life for about 2 hours. But, Jacob, what say you?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this Lynn Ramsey director, so I can't really vouch for what this director's done. I have seen Peter Jackson's The Lovely Bones, and I was pretty mixed on it. Like, I like the concept of the story. I love the visuals. There's good performances in there. Like, the girl is played by young Saoirse Ronan, and the serial killer in the movie is played by Stanley Tucci. Those performances are great. The ending is terrible. Like, anything that I loved about the movie is ruined by the end, which left a really bad taste in my mouth. I don't know. I know it's based on a book. I don't know if that's how the book ended, but the way it was executed in the movie was not good. And I did not like the direction that happened in like the last 10 minutes of the movie. I don't know if this director would have improved the story. I don't know. I can't really say. I've only seen the Peter Jackson film. I guess I'm more of a on it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Next up is Blood on the Tracks, directed by Luca Guadagnino, who would eventually go on to direct Call Me By Your Name. This would have been about the making of Bob Dylan's album of the same name, which included one of my personal favorite Dylan songs, Tangled Up in Blue. Considering that album was made after the dissolving of Dylan's marriage to Sarah Lowndes, I think this would be fascinating. Considering, like, if they made it kind of like Love and Mercy, the Brian Williams movie, I think this would have been fascinating.
Yeah, I think any movie made about a musician always fascinates me, especially if I'm a fan of some of these artists. Now, I'm not the biggest Bob Dylan fan per se, but I like some of his music. And I think I'm honestly surprised we haven't gotten a Bob Dylan esque movie because it seemed like he had a fascinating career with some really amazing songs. I would have been interested in seeing it if it was actually made. I'm not familiar with this director. I haven't seen Call Me by Your Name, but this sounded fascinating. I would have been intrigued to see it.
I know there was a Bob Dylan movie made called I'm Not There, starring Christian Bale and Tilda Swinton as both versions of Bob Dylan. It's about multiple different ideas of Dylan. It's a very art house movie, but I've heard good things about it. So there is a Dylan movie out there. It's just a very weird one from the sounds of it. Next is, here's Quentin Tarantino again, but it's his Star Trek movie. Now, I'm not sure if you heard about this one knocking around, but back when I was watching Collider Movie Talk and the John Campea show on a regular basis, this was a story that was getting featured quite a bit. And honestly, I love Quentin Tarantino. I'm a fan of Star Trek, but I'm not sure these two would have mixed, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that to a certain degree. Star Trek has its core fans. Quentin Tarantino has its core fans. They both have distinct flavors. Star Trek is like your thoughtful, hopeful, optimistic sci-fi series. Quentin Tarantino usually tells over the top, bloodbath, violent stories. Do they work together? I like the two separately. And I was interested in this project for a while, but especially now that I've seen all of Quentin Tarantino's movies, I'm like, yeah, it's probably a good thing that fell apart because that movie probably would have hurt Tarantino's reputation as one of the best filmmakers. I think people would be upset. They'd be like, why is Quentin Tarantino, does he have this like violent Star Trek movie that I can't take my kids to see? Because I think I had read he wanted to make it rated R, if I'm not mistaken. Oh,
Talk about an ultimate like oil and water thing where it's like Star Trek and Tarantino, good on their own, but together, no chance. Not
yeah.
a chance at all. Well, final three. Next up is the movie Harvey, which would have been a remake of the 1950 film. Steven Spielberg would have directed, and at one time it had Tom Hanks, Will Smith, and Robert Downey Jr. in the lead role at one time. And the 50 version tells a story about Jimmy Stewart, who befriends an imaginary 6-foot-tall rabbit. I have never seen this movie, but I can just picture Jimmy Stewart going like, I'm talking to a rabbit here. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I just can imagine.
Now, I have actually seen the original Harvey with Jimmy Stewart. It's actually really good. Jimmy Stewart's great in it, and you really root for him, even though a lot of people think he's crazy because he's talking to an imaginary rabbit. When you had first said that a remake could have been made, I'm like, uh-oh, here we go again. But then you said Steven Spielberg directing and Tom Hanks. I'm like, man, I would have wanted to see this because directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Tom Hanks. And guess what? Steven Spielberg can actually remake classic movies and do a great job with them and make them good in his own right. Like he remade War of the Worlds. That movie's awesome. He redid West Side Story. That movie's phenomenal. I think he would have done great with this story, done his own little flavor to it with Tom Hanks playing this character. I think that's another missed opportunity from an amazing director. I would have wanted to see it.
Yeah, me too. Well, final two. One more trip to see our good friend Guillermo, old GDT himself. This time it would have been Guillermo del Toro's The Count of Monte Cristo. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this. You know the story here. I recommend everyone check out the adaptation starring Guy Pearce and Jim Caviezel. It's awesome. But honestly, it makes me sad that this doesn't exist already because Del Toro, I think he would have given this story socks. And according to the article, he spent 15 years trying to get this off the ground.
Wow.
So it's just sad, but I mean, Del Toro's still very alive and still very popular, so who really knows?
Yeah, I actually don't know the story at all. I just know the title. That's it.
Well, it's an awesome book. You should do it on your second channel sometime.
I should consider that. I really should. I've heard nothing but good things about it, but I would have seen it just for the Guillermo del Toro factor alone. And he's still out there. I think he's currently working on a stop motion animated version of Pinocchio, which is supposed to drop on Netflix later this year. Maybe he can do Monte Cristo after that. I don't know what he's doing post Pinocchio, but I would love to see, I guess, him do that story. I guess since you're a fan of it.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. Well, let's wrap things up by talking about Martin Scorsese's Ramones biopic, which I don't know if you're familiar with the Ramones. They're the whole let's go, like that band.
Yeah.
Well, I think even if you don't know about the Ramones, I mean, it's Scorsese doing a music biopic. I think at the very least, this would have been fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not hugely familiar with the Ramones aside from the song you were just singing just now, but I would have seen it just for Scorsese alone. Definitely.
Yeah, and also give a listen to I Want to Be Sedated. That's another good one.
I've heard the misquote of that. People think it's "I want a piece of Amy." I'm like, oh, that's darker than the song was originally intended.
No,
Yeah, I want to eat my piece of Amy.
no, that's not it. But that's it. That's the end of the list. And reading through these movies that never got made, it gives me a bit of a bigger appreciation of just the movies that end up getting made, because it's like start from the idea and it's like it's hell to get there, but once you do get there, it's like a 1% chance of it even being successful, let alone good. So it gives credence to the movies that end up doing get made, and even the great ones, for making it through the quagmire to just be like ascend to the pantheon, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Well, anyway, that is all for us. That's another episode in the books. Jacob, we're definitely in the late hours. We're pulling overtime here, but thank you so much for hanging with me. It's always a pleasure. Where can people find you?
People can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, you can subscribe to my 2 channels. You can check out my second channel, Storytime with Jacob, as Ryan previously alluded to. On that channel, I do book reviews and read alongs. I got some really cool content coming up. I'm wrapping up a book called Scarred Land. And I think after that, I am probably going to be doing Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, one of my favorite Harry Potter things in general, whether book or movie. So I'm excited to revisit that book. On my main channel, got a lot of exciting stuff which just recently dropped. I just recently did a live stream with Rachel's Reviews where we talked about the awesome rom-com You've Got Mail starring Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. I did a Superhero Saturdays video recently where I talked about Spider-Man Far From Home. I've recently reviewed Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, The Fortune Cookie from Billy Wilder. Other reviews coming to the channel. I got a video for a movie called Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women, which begins my director project on filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich, who's best known for making movies like Paper Moon and What's Up, Doc, and The Last Picture Show. So that director project's coming real soon. I also have a video where I'll be reviewing Isle of Dogs this week, a collab video with Esley Greer from the channel Entertainment Fanatic Reviews from a Wes Anderson series. So I got a lot of content coming this week. I'm excited to do what I keep doing on both channels and sharing what I love and talking about movies and then reading books on my second channel. So some really good stuff.
Yes, his Twitter and both of his channels will be linked in the description. Go subscribe to him. It's great stuff. As far as this channel goes, if you did like this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment any of your thoughts down below. And if you like this video and you want to see more like it, do hit the subscribe button and click the bell to allow notifications. That way, whenever a new video drops, you'll be the first to know about it. just dropped a Twilight Zone video on Monday talking about the episode called 22. I'll also be reviewing Top Gun Maverick when it comes out. And then this coming Sunday, I will be reviewing Jurassic Park 3 after my first viewing of that. It's all a lot of fun. But that is all for us. Thank you all so much for watching. That's Jacob Martin. My name is Ryan Cam, and we will see you in the next one. Take care.